Did a famous Italian journalist fail the Pope again, or is the Pope keeping bad company? And with all the confusion in the church today, are the gates of hell prevailing against it? Today on Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta. Welcome to another episode of Free Range Q&A. I'm Nick Tom, along with Al Cresta, and our a little collection of chicks, because we are free-ranging in our answers to your questions. Shall we get started?
No, that's not
okay. Rick emailed in St. Charles, Missouri. In Matthew 16, verse 18, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Is that promise undergoing its greatest challenge today? And this question also came with a link to an article by Pat Buchanan asking the question, is the Pope toying with heresy?
Yeah. One of the reasons we think things are so bad today is because of the amount of reporting going on. I get messages every day from Catholic bloggers who really half the time don't know what they're talking about. And they're making claims that don't have any substance. So one of the reasons things seem so bad is because the nature of news is to report what is bad, what's conflict, what's challenge, what's change. Let me give you an idea. In Galatians chapter 2, St. Paul says that at the very beginning of the Christian church, he had to withstand the Pope to his face. Right? Paul had to withstand Peter, had to oppose Peter to his face. Why? Because Peter was playing the hypocrite. They had in Acts chapter 15, you have the Jerusalem Council. It's agreed upon that the Gentiles can be received into the church without having to pass through circumcision, the rituals of Judaism, the Sabbath days, okay? And yet, St. Peter refuses subsequently to sit at table with Gentiles for fear of maybe not eating kosher. And St. Paul has to say, you're playing the hypocrite. You're undermining the credibility of the gospel. Now that's at the very beginning. You have the Pope playing the hypocrite. That's right in the New Testament. After that, in the 4th century, we've got the Arian controversy where virtually all the bishops of the East reject the teaching that Jesus is God in human flesh. Now that might be the gates of hell prevailing, but they didn't. Well, let me tell you, Rick, things seem so bad today because we know so much more today about what's going on, and because we had such stability in the pontificate of John Paul II. It was a long and distinguished pontificate, followed by his right-hand man, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. With Pope Francis, we have a rubber meets the road kind of papacy, which is taking us or is trying to apply papal teaching in a different way. And a lot of us don't quite get it. But compared to history, nobody's denying the divinity of Christ. Nobody is saying, let's set up a third papacy. Nobody's saying, let's divide the church into 36,000 denominations. Nothing like that is happening. You mentioned Pat Buchanan's article, which I went and looked at, and thanks for sending that along. But in the article, Pat, who I've always enjoyed and think the world of him as a commentator and journalist, but in it, Pat says, if Catholic truths about the indissolubility of marriage and intrinsic immorality of homosexual unions can be changed, then either the Church has been in grave error in the past or the Church is toying with heresy today. Well, he's right, except that nobody is calling into question the indissolubility of marriage. That's not changing. Yeah. In absolutely no way is the Church even considering the morality of homosexual unions. Even the Synod made that absolutely clear. So let's not forget the past. That's one of our great benefits as Catholics. We've been around a while. We don't need to be spooked every time there's apparent confusion. No heresy is on the scene.
You mentioned John Paul II and Benedict. I mean, if you're under 45, 50 years old, you probably don't remember anything except John Paul II and Benedict.
No, that's true. And these were exceptional papacies. And centuries later we'll know just what they were. But right now,
Exactly.
just compared to what we know of the past, that's why we call him John Paul the Great.
Right.
He was great. Yeah. And we don't get greats very often. 3 times maybe in church history.
Yeah. We've got Susan in Seattle, Washington, who said, Italian journalist Eugenio Scalfari recently claimed that the Pope told him that he plans to allow for communion for divorced and remarried couples. First of all, do you think the Pope actually said that?
No. Let me make that clear. No. He said something, okay? He said something. But he didn't, I'm sure he didn't say that. First of all, why would he? I mean, why would he put that to an Italian atheist journalist who he's interviewed with at least once before, maybe twice before?
I think twice, yeah.
Scalfari is 91 years old. He's a notorious atheist who honestly believes that he knows it all. And this is not uncommon in journalists, especially older, distinguished journalists, or at least think themselves distinguished. They think they've heard it all before. And so they have conversations with interviewees that they feel they know pretty well. And they don't take any notes. He takes no notes. He doesn't record anything. And then he goes back and he writes about the conversation as he remembers it. And he doesn't so much invent the quotes as just reshapes the conversation for editorial purposes. That's what's going on here. I mean, this is the guy who says, let me just read from the first interview. He claims that Pope Francis said, the Son of God became incarnate in order to instill the feeling of brotherhood in the souls of men. Well, maybe he said something like that, but believe me, that is not the gospel, and Pope Francis doesn't think it's the gospel. The gospel is about the death of Jesus on our behalf and the resurrection of the dead. Gospel is good news. What's the good news? What are the mighty acts of God that have been performed that we should rejoice over? That's the gospel. In fact, there's a funny phrase I'd like to share with you. It goes back to a neo-Orthodox Protestant, H. Richard Niebuhr, and he's mocking Protestant liberalism and also Catholic liberalism. In their mind, the gospel is a God without wrath brought men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of a Christ without the cross. That's not Pope Francis's view of things, right? Scalfari gets it wrong. He's gotten it wrong. He in his first interview, he talks about proselytism, that Pope Francis talked about proselytism and called it solemn nonsense. Proselytism is not the same as evangelization. Proselytism is a way of inducing people to become Catholic through force, all right, or through wild promises of well-being. Pope Francis is not against evangelization. He wrote a document, The Joy of the Gospel. His whole work is about conversion. Don't give Scalfari very little attention.
Like you said, to play devil's advocate, this has happened multiple times. The Pope has been burned by Scalfari before. Why do you think he grants yet another interview?
Who knows? I mean, this is his ministry. He might sense that there's Scalfari has an interest, and like Jesus, Pope Francis is willing to go to the lost sheep. Maybe that's it. He does
just
remember
talking to the man in front of him.
I mean, he's right there. Yeah, he's there in the moment, and he talks with him. But I mean, look, Pope Francis is supposed to be modeling for us how to reach out to those who are outside the visible boundaries of the church. This gives him another way of doing it. If he's misunderstood, he's misunderstood. Jesus was frequently misunderstood and didn't go out of his way to set the record straight. So, I mean, he may think, in fact, he's imitating Christ in this way. Yeah. I don't know.
Anything you want to mention about questions you'd like to hear about from our listeners?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to know, what is the single greatest objection you encounter with the Catholic faith, either you personally or your friends? What's the single greatest objection that keeps people from embracing the joy of the gospel as presented through Christ's church?
Excellent. Thanks for viewing this episode of Free Range Q&A. We want you to participate. Leave comments on the question Al just asked, and we want you to contribute at Facebook, Twitter, and you can email us, freerange@avemariaradio.net. That's freerange@avemariaradio.net. The show is always more fun when we have millions of questions to pick from. We'll see you next time on Free Range.